And then you saw it was a New Yorker, and you're like, no. No.
Welcome back to the Remotely Creative Podcast. I'm your host, Scotty Carlson, and today we have special guest Graham Tracey, who's come all the way from the beautiful village, town, city of Nelson.
The Queen City, I believe. Isn't that what they call it? Or is that Trail? I don't remember. I think it's Nelson.
Yeah. Trail's the Silver City. We're the Golden City.
Okay.
Gold City?
Well, everybody's got a thing.
Yep.
Well, thank you for having me.
Yes, very excited. It's been a while, but we've worked together a lot over the years.
We have, and I remembered that when I was gearing up to move up to this part of the world, you were the first person I reached out to professionally.
Right. Yeah, I do remember actually getting your email, and I was thinking, because at that time, Roslyn was even smaller, hard to believe than it is now, and there wasn't a lot going on. There wasn't a lot of people doing anything kind of remotely close to what we were doing, so I was like, oh my God, it's going to be another guy who lives here, who knows what we do and can help.
And then you saw it was a New Yorker, and you're like, no. No.
So when you were in New York, you were working you were kind of doing a bunch of stuff, music, kind of doing music for...
Yeah. Quite a bit.
Yeah, like commercials and all sorts of like entertainment industry related.
Well, it started as a, well, first of all, my father was a advertising musician, a jingle singer, you could call him. A session singer has more of a regal air to it. There's something about the word jingle. It's like dingle. It's just doesn't have a good. So I was aware that if you're going to live in LA or New York and be a musician, eventually you're going to kiss the ring of advertising. You could probably say the same about graphic designers. You got to feed the monkey. But I started out, I got hired by a band called the Niagaras, which were, quote unquote, Hollywood's favorite band. And it would be nothing to see Julia Roberts in the audience, or those kind of people. Because the singer was very theatrical, a guy named Robert Whaley. His brother is Frank Whaley, who, if you remember, like the Doors movie, he played Robbie Krieger, or the famous scene in Pulp Fiction where Brett gets shot in the apartment. What does Marcellus Wallace? That's Frank Whaley. So, and he was the drummer in the Niagaras, and I replaced him. Anyway, I got hired by them just by going up. I saw him one night at Hogs and Heifers, and went up and said, "I love this band. I want to be in it." He said, "Well, we're looking for a drummer." And that was it. So that was 4 nights a week with that. And then, filling in with other things. And then another band, I met a guy who owned a advertising-based studio. And he referred me to an agent, Val Morris, who was controversial at the time because she took the standard business arrangement that my father had lived under, which was 10%, an agent's fee. And at that time, an agent might have 2 clients, right? Val expanded it to a 20% fee by changing her official title to manager, and then took on an enormous amount, right? It became a wholesale. So some of the older guard were like, "I'm not doing that." And I, myself being young, was like, well, why wouldn't I? So I signed with her, and then, long story short, entered the world of singing, and then eventually playing and writing for advertising.
Right. And I mean, up until this day, then you got into the world of voiceover and like narration.
Here,
yeah. So was Life Cycles the first...
Yep.
Long, right? So, and then since that point, I feel like you've been the voice of so many in sports and outdoor world, but also, in all sorts of different advertising and
less exciting things. Yes.
Well, I talked about it recently, but you've, car commercials or truck commercials and, which is super cool. Cause I think that rarely is like our path to anything straight. It's like all sorts of twists and turns and
chicanes. It's one of my favorite words.
It's a chicane. My kid's been saying he's got big into like auto racing, so lots of like chicane talk these days.
You can also say chicanery.
Right.
There's various forms of chicanery occurring. That's always good.
But we'll go back. So you're in New York. You're working in advertising. You're still playing in bands at that point.
Yeah, kind of a late night lifestyle, not kind of, perhaps the quintessential late night lifestyle back at a time when, I'm talking like it was, I guess it was long ago. You're used to hearing old like bluesmen or something talk that way. But, you and I both are approaching a place where we can look back in a rather antique fashion,
Yes.
Maybe things weren't that different, but I think there might have been a lot more live music opportunity, perhaps. How else are you going to play drums or bass 4 or 5 nights a week? That would be a hard trick to pull off nowadays, I would imagine.
Yeah.
And it wasn't a lot of money. I think I was getting paid $100 it was usually 75. So moving into the studio was a welcome shift for my pocket.
Yeah.
That's
were
for sure.
you married at that point, or were you still?
I was with my wife.
Right.
Yeah, we met at, we call it college down there, but I'll translate to university for the. It wasn't actually a university, meaning a variety of separate schools. It was a college.
Right.
Which didn't denote lesser, just not as. You couldn't go there to the veterinary school.
Right.
You went there for a variety of topics. Anyway.
Yeah, I'm with you.
That's just a boring discussion, so let's move on. I met her there, and then it was ever thus. So.
Now, so you grew up skiing and enjoying ski films.
Yes.
Some by Bill Heath.
Later.
Yeah.
That's what helped me to find this area, was seeing Ski Your Ass Off. And
Right.
Sinners. And I was like, where is that place?
So how do you go? Because some people, I'm always amazed by people that make that big of a life shift. Because you're, New York City, I live in Roslyn, and my goal, or one of my goals, is for someone in New York to demand my presence there.
Right.
We need you in New York City.
Yeah.
And then I'm like, I got to go to New York.
Yeah.
You were in New York, and you ended up moving to a town of 3,000 people that's here because there's a ski hill 5 minutes away. So how do you make what leads up to that transition, that decision to?
Right. Well, you can look at it. There's a sunny way to look at it and a little darker way to look at it. I'll start with the dark. Perhaps you've had enough
Right.
of your current lifestyle. Perhaps you saw a limited future in an urban environment. Maybe you were depressed. Maybe you were, as a freelancer, work tends to peak and valley. I don't have to tell you, although you've always seemed gainfully employed to me, which is delightful. And then, so the sunny way of leaving would be that we were making a lifestyle change. We both loved to ski. There's only so many. I remember being in a studio where I was a regular JSM, Joel Simon Music. It was one of the big advertising houses in New York. And, you'd be hanging around in the lobby or the lounge as you did back then. Nowadays, they pray that you're a remote worker. They don't want you breathing their oxygen, using their electricity, But they were like, yeah, you should come down this weekend. I was like, oh, no, I'm going to be skiing. And they looked at me and said, Jesus, you just skied last month, right? That was their real perception of the habit or the interest, that it was like if you went to Disneyland.
Yeah.
Like you do that once every couple of years, So they didn't understand, but, on a deeper level, that kind of spoke to a misalignment of my priorities. Because if I was really all in on that lifestyle, every weekend would have been chock full of schmooze. Show up, sit in, right? But instead I was with my wife and we just wanted to go sit by a fire and ski. time will tell how wise that was, but it probably won't. You maybe end up the same place you would have either way. But anyway, so that was the two ways of looking at it. The other way was we just kind of wanted something different, and we found it and came here. And, after a good 3 years of chest x-rays and various bodily fluid extractions and testings, Canada said, come on up.
Yeah, glad to have you.
Well, glad to be here. Believe me.
And since moving here, you've had a couple kids.
Yeah.
And now they're no longer little.
No, 14 and 17.
And so they've probably grown up skiing.
Oh, yeah.
And more than once a month, I'm guessing.
Oh, yeah. Ski racers. And, they have that sure-footed thing that lifers have. I didn't start skiing until maybe grade 3.
Right.
So it's not the same. My kids both born in the Roslyn house. Well, not in the Nelson Hospital, but then,
yeah,
you can say they were born in Roslyn, in a manner of speaking. And as soon as they could walk, they had skis on their feet. Yeah. And you can't duplicate that.
No. It's so different. I feel like anybody that grows up with just like that is just what you do from that age. I just remember watching my son just, things that I'm trying to do, I'm looking at it going, this is 6 to 8 turns, and he's just like that
skims over it.
Yeah, I'm just going there. And it's like, oh man, this is different. Cause like I grew up playing hockey and other things and didn't start skiing until I was older. And there's just, a different kind of, I don't speak the language natively.
Right.
It's a learned language.
There's a little bit of translation in your head. Yeah.
Constantly. And I'm like, I don't know that word yet.
Right.
I'm just going to hold back.
Yeah, that's a great way of looking at it. It's true.
But so you've made the adjustment, you moved to Roslyn, you live in Roslyn for 7 years.
Yeah.
And this new kind of similar to what you've done, but whole new kind of avenue, which is long form kind of voiceover of films, telling the story of films.
Yeah.
And I remember when friends of ours were making a movie called Life Cycles, a mountain bike movie that became a really big deal in the mountain bike world and the sports world.
Yeah.
You kind of come in early and were helping kind of with some music. And at that time, I remember talking to Derek and Ryan, who directed the film, made the film. And I was like, I think you should think about Graham for the voice. If my memory serves me, I'm like, I think he would like crush it.
Yeah.
And then you did the voice.
And I had the studio.
Yeah, the studio was all kind of like, you're here. It made sense. Your voice, because I think I know it's a common thing in Hollywood for directors to cast lead actors that are like the cooler, handsomer, better looking versions of themselves.
Right.
And I think in voiceover work it's similar. It's like you cast the voice you wish you had. It's like,
right.
Like, I understand you just sound way cooler than I sound.
Yeah.
And you did the trailer for them at that point.
Yes.
And I feel like that trailer was just this whole new feeling that like I hadn't seen in the sports world. The like grounding and depth and like the voice you brought to the bike was incredible. And I think from that point forward, a lot of people in the sports world saw that it was different. It felt fresh and new. And you became, I feel like, the voice that people came to, myself included, for.
Thankfully so.
Yeah. So I feel like you're kind of like one of the first people I probably knew that actually truly was working remotely for tons of people and brands. And
I was the first I knew.
Yeah.
People didn't do it. What was that? 2009, maybe 2008, when that was starting to. Well, I can go back a little bit to, let's call it 2007. I moved out here thinking that I would be a different person. I had dreams of, or not dreams, daydreams, whatever you want to call it, of like a B&B or something. And then, of course, you find out the critical mass of visitors and the median price of a home. It ain't going to happen. And then you wind up being the same person you were, and I rebuilt the studio. And I remember having the conversation with my agent in New York, that world being very convinced that it's the only place that anything can occur, And I remember saying to her, I rebuilt my studio and it's top notch. I can just record these auditions or the finals and send them. And she was like, really? Right? Now, nobody, of course, that's the way it's done, But then she didn't have a client out of dozens and dozens of, some of the best singers in New York anyway. You can rank them worldwide. You can extrapolate outward. These are people who know what they're doing. And so she agreed, and she kept me on the roster. And then, I had similar conversations with studios and producers, and they were like, you sure what kind of mic you're using? You sure about this? And it always worked out. I never had a single complaint about audio quality or anything else. And fast forward, maybe let's call it 4 years, and that's the way things became.
Yeah, I feel like it, and then obviously for most people during the pandemic is when all of a sudden this like ability for everybody to be like, oh, well, maybe very traditional roles don't even need to be on location. But at that time, like me working in Roslyn, and I was working for all sorts of different companies, but that was, even at that point, was still like, where are you?
Right.
And it's like, well, I could be, 10 minutes away or 8 hours. And like, ultimately we're just doing the same work and we're delivering it the same way. I'm not going to walk down the street and hand you a hard drive anyways. We're
That's
delivering
right.
files, but yeah, it definitely kind of over the last 20 years has been a big shift in like, nobody really asks anymore as they look at what you do. And
no, they're not. And even in the beginning, I got an agent in Vancouver, shortly after that. And I was getting on planes and trail, flying out to the South Terminal and, staying at various hotels and having a lost evening and then waking up and walking across Granville to that area of Vancouver where the studios are, And then that stopped, which I miss because it was fun to have 2 days to oneself with toddlers, but even that ended. Now, if you were saying, well, maybe I ought to come on out there, people would be like, what? Or I did back around the same time, a TV series on, remember, what was that motorcycle show? Sons of Anarchy.
Oh, yeah.
Kurt something was his name, who was the main creative mind behind that.
Yeah.
He made this, it was on A&E or one of those networks, about the real story of criminal organizations. And I got that job via remote audition, but I had to fly to LA to do the first couple because they had to make sure like I was a real person and not just like a vapor, Imagine that now, like nobody would, someone paying to fly you to LA, like, they're not going to do that.
I feel like my dreams of someone demanding I come to New York are fading.
I think that, not because you're not worthy of it, but because it's just simply unnecessary.
Yeah. Do you need me to come there? No. Why would we don't stay there?
Yeah, please.
Please don't come. There's enough people here already.
In fact, it's had real estate and spatial ramifications because a lot of these bigger studios have downsized to much smaller places. My agent used to have a place in where was it? It was near Madison Square Garden. When you looked out her window, you could see the garden right there. But why pay that rent, right? So she moved out to Long Island to her own space.
Yeah.
So with that, a lot of the glamour kind of disappeared. The studios I worked in as a young 20-something, the Power Station, which became Avatar, like Water Music in Hoboken, some of these great old places where you could touch the Neumann that David Bowie sang through on, Let's Dance, that kind of stuff. It's still there, but it ended, the spatial part of it, that FaceTime and the schmooze and the hanging out. I remember sitting in the break room in JSM and Steve Jordan comes out and he's sitting on the couch. This is my favorite drummer. Now he's the Rolling Stones drummer after, being in Keith Richards' band for years and playing with literally everyone else you've ever heard of. And, you just get to sit there and BS with Steve Jordan, which now there's no FaceTime. But it was, as you were asking before, it was life cycles that gave me that opportunity to talk rather than sing. Because at the same time, singing started decreasing in terms of how we sell stuff.
Right.
It's still there, but it's not like it used to be.
I miss it a bit for sure.
Well, yeah. In my father's era, it was people like Michael Bolton and Pebo Bryson. They were getting out of limos to go sing like God knows what. It's just how you sold product. So, making that switch to narrator made the remote thing even easier because using old ISDN boxes or Source Connect as it became, with music, you have to sync two separate concerns, in time, and there's delay between a 3,000-mile connection. With VO, there's nothing you have to sync to, right? Reading the voice copy, it exists in a vacuum. So that made it even easier to be remote.
Totally.
And I have done plenty of vocal sessions, and the engineer on the other end, if they're worth their salt, can account for the delay. And it works out. But being able to switch to a narrator role really opened up my work possibility. And I owe it to Life Cycles, frankly, and to you.
It was inevitable. But the cool thing, because I think, I remember I did this project for a big video game company, and it was just, we're sending in kind of the rough draft. And so it didn't have a professional voiceover yet, which ended up being you in the end. But I did the temporary voiceover. I submitted it, and it came back with not many notes, but overwhelmingly the note was, the voiceover is terrible. And even though they knew it was temporary, and everybody knew still there's something about just a bad voiceover. And it was not just one, but I just kept getting notes and emails please tell me that this is just a temporary voiceover. This is the worst, and
jeez,
yeah, it definitely makes you feel a little bit self-conscious. So I went on to host a podcast eventually,
right? But well, I've never considered you to have a bad voice.
Thanks.
You know what I mean? I mean, maybe there's a difference between having a bad voice, some people get and you hear him talking across the coffee shop and you're like, what the hell's going on with that guy? Yeah. You don't have that. I mean, there is a performative aspect to doing a quote-unquote professional voiceover, I guess. There's a proximity effect on a microphone. You have to know, it's a physical phenomenon that the voice deepens and becomes grittier the closer you get to the capsule, So there are scientific things that you have to know to get it to be better, but a variety of voices can work for different things. I see no reason why you could not effectively narrate something if it was the right thing.
Yeah, this was not the right thing.
Well, there you go. Yeah, I mean, I've heard a video game narration or two. They're going for the Gandalf kind of,
yes. But also it was there's so much to it in inflection and in embodying something, and you say, just the understanding of how to use a microphone. There's a lot more to it than I think myself, would know, but I knew at least that I wasn't right.
There's a rhythm to it.
Yeah.
I think I came at the whole thing from the perspective of a musician. And you'll find with a lot of great singers, I'm not counting myself in that, but if you look around, Steven Tyler, for instance, Aerosmith, he's a fantastic drummer. And that's a very, you'll find that over and over again, that really it's not so much the quality of the voice, but the way in which it's phrased. Frank Sinatra, is his voice extraordinary in and of itself in a vacuum? I don't know. Sounds like a dude with a deep voice. I mean, sure. What makes his genius is his use of rhythm.
Totally.
Knowing when to break the rules of it. The Italians call it rubato, which is moving in and out of what real time is, dragging and then catching up. And it creates the push and the pull that makes Sinatra's singing so famous. John Bonham and Led Zeppelin is another example. His innate sense of rhythm was behind what is real. And so it creates a kind of like that moment before you fall off. If you were to stand in front of your bed and let yourself go, it creates that feeling, and that's something that humans like. It's a anticipation almost, So knowing how to play with that as a voiceover person has been valuable for me, because I certainly didn't come at it as from an actor's standpoint. I have absolutely no acting experience.
Which I think is like, I think it makes, I don't want to say what the right word is, unique, but when you do deliver a voiceover, it does have this like cadence, I'd say is probably like the best. And, as you're saying that, I feel like a lot of the stuff you're describing is also used in animation, which is about like building up anticipation, the overshoot, and then kind of like the easing of pulling back. And also like, lots of stuff in animation, you make the fast faster, make the slow slower, and you're right. I remember, trying to like direct you with like what I've got in my mind as far as voiceover. And, I've played it a million times in my head of like how this will sound. And I do my bad temp voiceover. Yeah. And then you'll give us that because, you're a professional, but then you'll give us some variations on that. And I'd say 9 times out of 10, the variation that you've created is the one we end up using. Right. Because there's, like you say, there's just that sense of like
dynamics.
Yeah. And if everything's at this level, then everything just gets boring. But once you create that sense of drama and mystery and
it works in the visual realm as well, right? Dynamics is not just a musical term. When you look at a great painting, there's dynamics. There's a use of space. What do they call it? Synesthesia, where sound is color, and they do. I don't think it's hocus pocus. It's very real. So that doesn't surprise me to hear that in the design world that is also being employed.
Yeah, for sure. And I think it's, just like you say, it's the human side. It's, when things are repetitive or just continuous, it just becomes one sound. It doesn't pull us back in. But when you have something that just changes that tempo a bit, that just lets you hang for a moment longer, it's like whether that's a music or a great line in a movie or a commercial. I think that's why I still also like jingles. I've always loved jingles.
Yeah. They're funny.
Yeah, they're funny. And when they're singing, because I think it naturally lends more to that kind of like rhythm and kind of up and down. And, when you bring that to also a voiceover, it's probably like creates the best of the both worlds, especially in advertising too, when it's like you do have 30 seconds to stand out or to like have something be memorable. Yeah. That you don't just want someone talking.
Yeah. Well, I'm making a new website right now. I'm finally decided to grow up, put on my big boy pants and try to maybe market myself a bit, which I've always been terrible at. Maybe it's an esteem issue. So I don't know what. But I went back over some of the old 30-second things, and there's a couple examples of really cramming some stuff into that 30-second space. I did something for Hot Pockets once, which it was a lot for 30 seconds. It was a take on Hot-Blooded by Foreigner, which Lou Gramm, the singer from Foreigner, was actually involved in, and he chose me to be the approximation. Instead of hot-blooded, it was Hot Pockets, hot ham and cheese, that kind of thing. Not my best work, but they kept just fitting more and more, and they needed more, and by the end of it, I sounded like Jack Black. It was like they didn't trust that anyone would just get the joke.
Right.
They were afraid that if we didn't make it really overtly jokey and so up down, and that people would be like, what? Which I think was a mistake.
I think too, I like jokes that don't need to be over. I do like some over the top jokes, but I think the best jokes are often just more subdued. But I think back on like work like that, and some serious work or meaningful work is great, but also like just those fun, goofy Hot Pockets jobs, I think are actually like really important. I work on some big high profile stuff, and it's like fun and can be stressful, but I also work on kind of goofy, smaller things. And oftentimes those are like funny and more memorable in a way, because they're like, what do we do? This is just silliness.
Yeah. And, then you can laugh at yourself a bit, which, never hurts.
Yes.
There's a great old quote, don't be afraid to laugh at yourself. You'll never run out of material. Something along those lines, And that occurred to me. I watched this old Circle K ad I did, and it's just so ridiculous, and I could hide and be embarrassed, or just like, what are you going to do? Got to feed the monkey.
Oh yeah. There's a lingerie commercial locally that's got a jingle that just like gets stuck in my head.
Yes, Castlegar. I know it.
And I think even like there's like a plaza around here too that gets stuck. And I think like there's something to like, it's goofy, but it's fun and it's funny. It's not taking itself seriously. And
Andres, that one.
That's another one. Yeah.
Castlegar is a hot spot of some advertising, I think, man.
Keeping the jingles going for sure.
They really are. My favorite when I first moved up here, I was, just settling in, and I'd drive down to Spokane, or it even came in up here because they were trying to get Canadians to come down to Chewelah Casino.
Oh, yeah.
Do you remember that one?
Yeah.
Chewelah Casino, the place that treats you right. Good folks, good times.
Good food?
Hot dice and table games where the winning is easy and you're always glad you came, I think is what it was. It was like a Levon Helm attempt, Good times. It was. I still sing it sometimes. I'll bust out like making breakfast, and Darcy will be like, "My God, man, stop it!"
But every time I drive it, because I love going to Spokane. Been less lately, but for a long time I'd go there many times a year. The closest kind of like city that we could get to, and downtown's cool, big old buildings.
Yeah.
And every time I drove past Chewelah Casino, just like
it started with like these cheesy organ dun 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 dun, and then boom, it kicked in. That kind of stuff is funny. Just when you think it's gone, you find another one.
You've been in the business for a long time.
25 years.
Yeah, that's a good stint.
I think so.
I imagine you've seen things, like you said, there's ebbs and flows to it all the time. What's the biggest change, I guess, that you've seen in your industry over that time?
Well, I'm sure people would say like, oh, he's going to talk about AI. And, I could, except I don't see it affecting me. You can spot it. Like it's obviously cheap. Will it be as good as a real person in 10 years? I certainly hope not. I mean, none of it is interesting to me at all. But I've gotten several calls from people who are like, the client, they want to use this AI track. I'm trying to tell them that it sucks. Will you do an example read so I can prove to them how much the robot sucks? And so I do it, and inevitably, in the 2 or 3 examples, people are like, oh, right. So I don't see that as a change yet. Less singing would be a change I've seen. Other than that, it just kind of, advertising just trucks on.
Yeah.
I'm going to correct myself. Here is the biggest change I've seen. 20 years ago, it was, B-level, call it an actor, C-level people who would get the job on camera talking about or speaking about, say, a mobile phone. Let's call it Verizon because that's the spot I'm thinking of because it's currently playing on NFL broadcasts. Now it's Billy Bob Thornton.
Right. This
man has won Oscars. Like the same thing with that J.K., what's his name? He's got the shaved head.
Simmons? J.K.
Yes.
Simmons?
The man wins an Oscar and the next minute he's doing like an insurance commercial. It's staggering to me. And, I'm familiar with celebrity endorsement rates because you can see it at several of the agents I've had over the years. It's way more than standard Screen Actors Guild or even double scale or whatever. It's way above it. But that's what companies have moved toward. Is it seems like they're not able, the large ones, they feel like they're not able to sell something unless there's a celebrity face. And that becomes the joke. Like, for instance, during baseball season, Ken Griffey Jr., as much as I love him, I didn't get the joke because it's not a joke. There's a couple sitting there, I forget the product and it doesn't matter. Let's call it a widget. They're sitting there discussing their life as it pertains to the use of this widget and just how much it's going to be improved. And then at the end of their incredibly trite conversation, they hear the window open and they go, "Ugh!" And Ken Griffey Jr.'s face pops up and he leans in their house and says like, "I did," or something.
Yeah.
And then that's the joke. Like, that's the punchline, right?
Yeah.
This company, it's almost like getting an autograph from someone so you can prove that you stood next to them. Yeah. That's what these companies are doing. Like, totally. My mobile phone stands next to Billy Bob Thornton.
Yeah.
Now, the first thing you say is like, I mean, my God, does he need the money? And then, of course, your first answer is, how could he? But then, of course, wealth is usually a matter of perspective. Like, some people might make $100,000 a year. Other people might make 10 million. They each have corresponding expenditures for the lifestyle, right? So maybe he's got 4 ex-wives.
Yeah.
Maybe it's, that can get pricey. I recommend staying with one. Kids at home. Find a nice person. So that's the biggest change, is that a lot of the middle level work, and this goes for voice work, because I shouldn't be talking about on-camera work because it's not what I do, but a lot of it has been absorbed by celebrity endorsement.
Yeah, and just those like awkward celebrity endorsements and cameos, super weird. Let's stop with that. It just feels so uncomfortable. It feels like a paycheck.
Yeah.
It feels like, and it just feels so disingenuous and uncomfortable to me. Like,
and that's even part of the joke. Like Shaq just did one.
Yeah.
For something really low level, like printer.
Right. Oh yeah, I saw those.
And I'm sorry, I don't mean to like insult Epson. It's great. I'm sure their printers are wonderful. I probably own one, but I wouldn't know. Epson brother, I couldn't tell you. And he's sitting there like, mugging.
Yeah.
And the lack of, what did you call it? Disingenuous?
Yeah.
The disingenuity of it is the joke almost.
Yeah, totally. Which is a strange, and like I've done stuff with some pretty high profile athletes, and the amount of time you get with someone on that list is so small that often they don't know, maybe some are different, maybe the Ryan Reynolds of the world that are like pushing the creative and they're part of all of it, are like putting in the effort and the time. But lots of it is they're showing up and then they're learning right there what they're doing.
Oh, 100%.
And then they do it, and then their manager tells you you're out of time, and then they're off to the next thing or the next lunch or meeting.
And, that's nothing new. Sam Elliott with the, beef, it's what's for dinner, that thing. He had a clause, and I might not be quoting this exactly correct, but let's approximate. You get 2 reads. That's it. And he's gone. Like you walk in, he reads it twice and he's out, and he doesn't care if it's not everything you wanted. Yeah. Or if your script, you missed a word. Done. Yeah. So that is the biggest change I've seen, and it bums me out. I don't like to see the commercials, and it definitely has decreased my work.
Right.
I used to be the guy in New York they'd hire to approximate, I could do Bono, I could do Steve Perry, I could do those sorts of more anthemic, somewhat acrobatic singers. And it used to be that those, bands of note, they wouldn't dream of selling their stuff to a canned concentrated soup brand. Oh, man. And now it's almost become like they flip the script on it, like it's hip. Yeah. We're not selling out. We're remaining relevant. It's cool to sell soup all of a sudden. Totally. So now that took me right out of that. Why hire this numbnuts to sound like Bono? We'll just go license it from Bono, or who perhaps he chooses not to. I don't want to misquote him, but a lot of these people have sold their catalog to separate people, so they're not in control. As soon as Bob Dylan offloaded his catalog for estate planning purposes, essentially, you heard "Blowin' in the Wind" on a insurance commercial, I believe, not long after.
Yeah, no, I agree. When I first started, licensing any kind of music was a really challenging task to do, and often required, obviously, you're dealing with a music supervisor, a licensor, and then they're kind of going to the band's agents and manager, and you kind of work your way through all the way to the band, and then they want to see what it is, and oftentimes it's a no. Yeah. They just don't want their music associated with that, or
that's right.
And now up recently, especially the last 5 years, it's kind of like I can just go online to a service. I won't name any right now, but I can just type it in, and
there's quite a few.
There's quite a few that they exist there.
And but the higher profile stuff, the Rolling Stones are still yet to do it, I believe. I don't think I've seen Jumpin' Jack flash on a Jack in the Box commercial. Perhaps they have a principle that supersedes it, but most no longer do.
Yeah. So where do you find, where's most of your work coming from these days?
Word of mouth.
Yeah.
I still do have one agent in New York, and he's an old friend at this point. He started as one of the underlings for Val Morris, who I mentioned before. She's since retired, and now Mike has gone his own way. And, I can count on some work from him. A lot of paid auditions. As a singer, you get paid for an audition, which is nice. So, I'll spend a couple hours singing a spot, editing it, sending it along, maybe make $200-300, something like that, and then hope it gets chosen. But of course, you're one. Let's say if there's 5 composers in a particular house, each composer will hire a singer. That house is one of, it could be 40.
Yeah.
So you do the math. It's not my area of expertise, but that's a lot of cattle call.
Yeah.
So I've learned to, abandon hope, all ye who enter here, is a good mantra to have for all you kids, because I get that question quite a bit. Hey, I'm especially during COVID. I'd have the barber calling me up saying, I heard you do voiceovers. I'm thinking of getting into it. Can you help me? I'm like, sure. Do you have a time machine? Are you a full bird audio engineer? No. So can't help you, bud. I can barely help myself. Yeah. So most current work is just a lot of people who've used me before and are finding their own new work. You know, it comes from all over. A lot of Europeans, South Americans. You know, I'm kind of like a spider. I've spun a little web, and I just wait for something to fly into it. I'm attempting just now to become a little less passive.
Right.
You know, if only to make this new website and kind of have it as a business card. You know, I think of that scene in American Psycho where they're all comparing business cards.
Yeah, totally.
You know, it's such a great thing. You know, look at that raised. Oh, look at that off-white or whatever he said. So I'm trying to, you know, to make GrahamTracey.com into that sort of a portfolio business card that will last and not have to be altered. And hopefully, you know, push a little bit more and see what comes of it.
Yeah, I think, you know, like we're talking about growing up skiing and it being your native language. And I feel like we didn't grow up with the internet as a native language to us or social media. Yeah. And so like you, it's not something that I natively do on my own. Like it is an act of like remembrance. And then, you know, like, oh, I should do this. I should post the work I've done recently because that's how people know what you're doing. Yeah. But there's people who do it while they're working on the project, and like I'll see stuff posted daily, many things daily, and I'm like, how did how did you even do that? It's so fast.
And did you do the work so you could, you know what I mean? Yeah. I remember I am not a social media person. When I look through Instagram, I get like a sinking feeling. It's dark, you know, it's just not my thing. But an early thing that I did attempt was something called Untapped. Right. It was a beer nerds social media, wherein when you had a new, unique beer, you would take a picture of it and post it, and you collected badges for levels. And I found myself one day at I think it was in Portland, maybe at a famous beer bar, specifically ordering a beer because I didn't have it on my list of unique. And then I was like, okay, the gig's up. And I literally, this is going to sound like gobbledygook, but I deleted it. Right. I ended my career on that at that moment. Nice. I had the realization like, no, I'm going to drink what I want. And if that's a PBR right now, then that's right? So, yeah.
I had the same thing with Strava. I remember.
See, I don't even know what that is.
Yeah, it's like tracking your distance and speed when you're out mountain biking or running.
Oh, interesting.
And so lots of people use it and then there's a social component which shows you based on like where you live and the trails you are on, who's the fastest, all the different things. And I remember the moment that I was like thinking about how fast I did it last time versus how fast I did this time. And I wasn't thinking about like the enjoyment of mountain biking. And I was like, oh, not for me. And now I notice it like if I'm riding and someone's, you know, that I know is coming up to me, that they're not going to want to stop and talk because it's going to affect their Strava time. And I just think that's like such a wild thing. And I get that there's people that it's really important to you. I get it. It's just not to me because I just want to enjoy it. You know, it's, again, I didn't grow up with it, and I do things for the reasons I want to do them for.
Yeah. And they're out doing it for a reason. They're playing a little game with themselves and their friend group. But what it does is it creates isolation.
Yeah.
And this is one of the great problems, right? Yeah. Because now they've taken themselves out of how many times was I riding through that field down near Warfield and I'd pass like Dilly and sit there and have a 10-minute conversation, you know, imagine, right? Yeah. It becomes almost like an airport of the mind where you're just getting somewhere. Yeah. And, you know, big cities do that to you. It's not that like New Yorkers are unfriendly. I think it's precisely the opposite, but they're hemmed in by a mass. You know, and now I think a lot of these medias are creating that an overcrowding of the mind in a way. It's not good. I kept my kids away from it.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard because it's everywhere, and
Yeah.
you feel the social pressure because everybody has it, Dad. You know, but the amount that we've let our older kid try it, it's like it has not worked out well, and he's, you know, he hasn't had a phone now for the past 3 months or 4 months that it's been removed from his life, and he now finally, which I give him credit, admits like I was not good with the phone, you know, and it sucks because I want to be able to contact him, and often he's off skiing on his own, and there's things that's like, this is beneficial to have a phone, but we just need to get him a flip phone or something that's like purely
Apple Watch. We did that for the 14-year-old as like a sort of, you can communicate and you can send a text and you can do minor tasks, but you're not going to be a thumb boy, you know. And you know, my 17-year-old, I'd like to think as a result of having a total blackout of it for the first 14 years of his life, he kind of, I mean, he has Instagram, but I think he kind of takes it even off his home screen for long periods of time. He's just, it seems frivolous to him.
I think some, you know, I know some younger kids too that are like my son's age 13 that are just really great with things. Like they don't get addicted seemingly as easily, and they can like regulate themselves. And everybody's different, and I know where I'm at. Like I get addicted to things easily, and it is hard even as an adult to be like, "Ooh, I need to maybe step back from that for a bit."
But it has, you know, more on topic. It has ramifications for people like you and I, how to self promote.
Yeah,
you know, I mean, I'd like to get this new website up and somehow integrate the Instagram, except from a portfolio perspective, you can't really put that on Instagram, you know. And the designer said Instagram works from there and leads to your website, not necessarily standing alone.
Totally.
I could get some editing program. I mean, I could use iMovie probably and take old clips, turn it into my own, and then be able to post it on Instagram. But that's a lot of rigmarole for a guy like me.
Yeah.
For you, it's probably like, you probably push a button and get it on there.
Yeah, easier.
And I'm sure I could learn, but then it becomes like, why? So I'm faced with the dilemma of, am I going to integrate any social media at all into my personal promotion?
I think it works best when it feels easier. And I think, you know, when I think about you, I don't have thought about it in the past, is like, you have so many great stories of like sessions you've done, or like, you know, when you're doing voiceover with someone and they're at their own, you know, agency or wherever they might be, and just like these funny interactions and all. I thought those are the stories that really people want to know. It's not, there's the work, which is great, but then there's like you and the life and the personality and the human.
And that could be an Instagram page.
Yeah.
But what do you post then? Is it the logo of the brand you were doing when the story happened?
I think it's just you like having a camera, like a cell phone set up on a tripod looking at you, and you just
really tell an advertising story.
Just a funny 5-minute, because there's all these people like us that exist just outside of that world where we kind of like have a toe in it.
Yeah.
But it's hilarious and it's funny and it's like makes us feel connected to it. And
interesting. See, I hadn't even considered that.
Yeah.
And you know, that's I don't have a good personal promotion mindset. I consider it like, again, maybe it's an esteem thing. Maybe I'm just inherently not proud of it. I don't know. But either way, I'm in it. So you might as well. Totally. But that's a good idea, you know. I mean, for instance, the Firestone ad I did was my first national campaign, 2003. 2002, something like that. It was down to myself and another singer. And there was a famous old race car driver, who I won't name. And he had 2 of the classic, like, ring girls, you know, all done up with the hair. And they were literally like, and this is coming from the producer telling me this, under his arm. And the executives can't decide. And between me or the other guy. And finally, one of them turns to, you know, the old race car driver and says, looks at him, and he turns to one of the girls and goes, "What do you think, darling?" And she goes, "I like that one." And then the executive was like, that's the one. And it was me. So, I mean, you can't make that up, you know?
No.
And so that of all fickle things is what led to me getting my first like big gig.
Yeah. And you know, like, that's a great one. And they're all kind of like that. I find like rarely is it paint by numbers. You get it because you're the right person and you did the work, and it's just like randomness, seemingly random events that lead to these things that can change and direct your career. But I'll wrap it up here because I've kept you long enough. Hire Graham because he's incredible to work with and delivers something that is going to just make you feel like anything you wrote is way better than the actual words you have on your page, and an incredible human to work with. So
thank you.
Thank you very much for coming in. Thank you for being a huge part of my career. And let's make sure we keep that going and find ways to do it more.
I'm in. Thanks, Scotty.
All right, thanks, buddy.